Hey y'all, it's Amy, and today I'm here to talk about Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Wow, they didn't rename this one after release. Can we talk for just one quick second about the brilliance of starting your trilogy at Episode 4? I mean, it practically begs the audience to ask for the first 3 stories. If I ever write a book, I'm going to start my series at book 11, because not only will my audience demand the first 10 books, but also it'll go to 11.
The numbers all go to 11.
Anyway, so this movie is much worse than I remembered. I think everyone remembers what really works here, which is the resolution of the main plot of the original trilogy, and they sort of forget the rest of the film. It's really a shame because there are so many of the right ideas here, but the execution is just, I don't know if we'll say lacking, but it just goes in a different direction and different tone than I was expecting. And I was really surprised when I rewatched it to make this review because I thought I liked this movie. I do think some of the changes from the special edition are what is so particularly bad about it, but it's not all of the problem. There are problems with it beyond just the special edition meddling, unfortunately. So, let's just jump right in, and I'll do this roughly in order by the things I liked the most to the things I liked the least. Part 1, Vader's Redemption. So Vader's story through the trilogy, and especially in this film, is definitely one of the best redemption arcs ever put to screen. In the first 2 films, Vader is an intimidating and effective villain. While we know he takes orders from the Emperor, he is the visible threat that our heroes are fighting against through the first 4 hours of the trilogy. And he embodies that role really, really well. From David Prowse's, I think it was Prowse, wasn't it? From David Prowse's looming physical presence, to James Earl Jones's deep delivery of some of the most iconic lines in film history,
I am your father.
Darth Vader is one of the finest villains ever put to screen. Side note, I would love to hear Vader's lines in Prowse's West Country accent. Think Hagrid if you're not sure what that is.
You're a wizard, Harry.
Hashtag release the Prowse cut. If the films had ended with a straightforward battle between Luke and Vader, I'm not sure anyone would have complained, but the addition of their relationship adds a new layer to the conflict, and the redemption of Vader, rather than his defeat, subverts our expectations in a satisfying way, because his change is earned. I'll talk a bit more about subverting expectations in later reviews, but I think it's important to know that while it's basically become a dirty word because of how poorly it's been done over the past decade or so of entertainment, the concept of subverting expectations isn't automatically bad and can be effective if utilized correctly. So let's take a look at how Vader's redemption is set up in this film. Darth Vader shows up in the new Death Star because, yes, we're doing another Death Star, and the commander that he meets there is pretty afraid of Vader. He probably should have listened to me from my previous review and not gotten promoted, but here he is, and this guy just seems like a decent dude trying his best. He wants more resources, and he's concerned about completing the task of building the Death Star with the resources that he has, and one of these days, I'm gonna make a video comparing scenes from all the various Office comedies out there to this series of movies because, and I know I've said this before, but this is such an accurate representation of Office politics. A surprisingly competent middle manager recognizing the problems, but being told no, just get it done anyway with less than half of the resources that you actually need. Not anything that I've ever experienced. Anyway, this kind of dissension would have ended with him force-choked, or worse in the previous film. But this guy is super lucky. He survives this encounter. Darth Vader spares this commander, even though he gives him bad news, and he says that the Emperor probably won't be so forgiving. That's pretty good foreshadowing. I think this is the first sign we see from Darth Vader of him showing any sort of mercy or having any sort of patience or tolerance for not being told the exact answer he wanted. So I think this is a good small piece of development heading towards his ultimate redemption. I can imagine the Imperial Slack channel probably being like, Vader went soft, but ultimately this is a good sign of what's to come. Darth Vader's next scenes with the Emperor are a little repetitive.
He will seek you out. Then you must go to the Centauri moon and wait for him.
He will come to me.
Talking about Luke and bringing him to the dark side. In the second one of these scenes, Vader calls Luke his son, and while he can sense that Luke is near, something we know to be true because we're shown Luke on the stolen Imperial ship, the Emperor can't sense Luke, hinting that the connection between Luke and Vader is stronger than the Emperor knows. The Emperor does pick up on this, and he asks Vader if his feelings are clear on this matter, but he also seems to trust Vader's response and doesn't doubt his devotion. He tells Vader Luke will come to him, which he does, and then we end up with the confrontation between Luke and Darth Vader on the moon of Endor. And Luke comes in and he calls him father.
I know, father.
Which is kind of cute. But then he's kind of arrogant and a little antagonistic. Like, he's certain that Vader still has good in him, and he puts a lot of trust in Vader not to just kill him where he stands. I guess he can feel the good with the Force. We get a small fake out when Vader turns on Luke's new lightsaber, which Darth Vader says completes his training as a Jedi. But what actually completes his fucking training? I mean, everybody seems to have some opinion on it. Yoda tells him at one point that it's when he faces Vader, I guess for a second time, because he already faced Vader that one time. So is it like you need to face your enemy twice to become a Jedi? And then it's like, oh, well, you made your lightsaber. So that was one of the steps, I guess, in becoming a Jedi. But Yoda never mentioned that. Like, he never told Luke that he needed to make a lightsaber to be a Jedi. And then at some point later, Luke just declares himself a Jedi. And it's like, maybe that's what he needed to do all along. Like, all he had to do was say, I'm a Jedi. Do you say that 3 times and like click your heels and then you're a Jedi? I mean, I'm just pretty confused on what makes someone a Jedi. But anyway, Luke tries to convince Vader to turn back to the light side, but Vader tells him it's too late and he's giving him over to the Emperor. There's a nice moment here after Luke tells him his father really is dead. I'll come back to the Obi-Wan he killed your father retcon later, but we sit with Vader for a moment as he reacts after Luke is taken away. David Prowse does a lot here in his slight lean forward to convey his conflicted feelings, even though we can't see his face under the mask. The first time I watched it again while making this video, I found myself wanting a little action here, showing us Vader's evolving feelings toward Luke rather than having them talk about them. But considering their fight later, I actually like this more grounded moment. The only moment they really get as father and son until the very end. Father! Alright, so the next we see of Luke, Vader's bringing him before the Emperor. There's these cool Imperial guards in red uniforms we've seen a couple of times, and you're thinking, oh, that's gonna be a cool fight. But no, the Emperor sends them away pretty much immediately, which is kind of annoying. And then the Emperor talks about completing Luke's training as a Jedi. Again, who is the authority on the training of the freaking Jedi? Like, why are there so many different opinions about what makes someone a Jedi? I really struggle with this one. I'm sorry. Okay, Luke. Luke is wearing black, and I think he wears black in most of the promotional materials for this movie, so it's kind of suggestive that he's gonna fall to the dark side. And so the Emperor and Luke are having this like little dick measuring contest over who knows what's gonna happen here, and Luke tells the Emperor his overconfidence is his weakness, which is more or less the thesis of Star Wars, and the reason for all the rebel victories up to this point. The Emperor and the Imperials continually underestimate the side of good. And then the Emperor tells Luke that his faith in his friends is his weakness. But he's wrong. As the movie shows us, it's actually his strength. Which makes you wonder why it's such a thing in the prequels for the Jedi to have no attachments, when clearly the attachments that Luke has with his friends and that Luke has with his father are what saves all of them. But anyway, the Emperor wants Luke to try to kill him due to his anger over the rebellion, because the rebellion is fighting currently on the moon of Endor and kind of around it in space, and fighting this new Death Star, which, surprise, was fully operational all along. It was all a trap to bring Luke to the dark side. So the Emperor set a trap for Luke to kill all of his friends, I guess to get him to come to the dark side where the Emperor will control him. I don't know where he was going with this, I gotta say, in terms of his plan. I mean, he's like, oh, but your anger will bring you to the dark side and bring you to me, or to kill me, or to kill Vader and then take his place, or my place. And there are a lot of different options here, and it's not really clear which one he actually wants to happen. And you're kind of like, is this a succession plan? Like, is he planning on having just whoever needs to be the next emperor kill him to make that happen? I mean, as far as succession plans go, it's not the worst. It's at least better than the plans that the dad has in the show Succession, which mostly seem to be about dunking on his kids rather than ensuring a future for his company.
I fucking win.
But anyway, we're back with the Emperor and Luke, and we see this scene with the Emperor goading Luke to fight a couple of times. Pacing is really off here at the end. There seems to be a lot happening because we keep cutting back and forth between various action shots, but also a lot of what's happening is sort of nothing. Especially like on the surface of that moon where Leia, Han, C-3PO, and R2-D2 are trying to get into the bunker, but they can't get in the door. And I don't know why we just keep coming back to that because nothing seems to really happen there. But eventually, the Emperor does piss Luke off enough that he takes the saber to strike down the Emperor, which is about as close to the dark side as he gets here. It's not clear what would have happened next had he been successful here. That's an interesting idea for a fanfic. But he fails because Vader defends the Emperor or something, and then it's time for arguably the best lightsaber fight of the original trilogy. Luke is actually really kicking some ass here, but then he decides to pull out of the fight.
Obi-Wan has taught you well.
I will not fight you, Father.
But then when Vader keeps coming at him, he does defend himself, which, fair enough. I mean, I wouldn't want to die that way either. Luke gets away, and I don't love Luke telling us again that he feels the conflict in Vader rather than showing it to us. It worked okay in the last scene when they're just talking, but now they're actively fighting. This could have better been demonstrated through action, through Vader getting a chance to kill Luke but not taking it. There's a few more uneventful cutaways, which worst of all seem to have no impact on this central plot situation because they're insulated from the fighting here. But eventually we get back to Luke hiding from Vader, trying to avoid the fight. It would have been a nice slowdown in the scene if we just stuck with it instead of continuously cutting away. Then Vader learns about Leia existing from Luke's thoughts, which I guess means that these guys are just straight up mind readers now. I mean, I guess the mind trick thing means that telepathy was never necessarily out of the picture, but again, it's one of those powers that kind of appears now when it's convenient, and you kind of wonder why it was never used before, when it seems like it would have been really useful at several other points in the story. Maybe this only happens because Luke and Vader have this Force connection now. I don't know. But anyway, the Leia reveal serves to compel Luke to fight. He's truly angry now, and I mean, he just is like wailing on Vader, and it's great. Like, it's really good to watch. Luke manages to cut off Vader's robot arm, or one of his robot arms. I don't know how many arms are robotic that he has, but anyway, another arm comes off and it's robotic. And Luke has won, basically. Like, he's disarmed Vader and he could end this right here, and the Emperor's just like laughing, and you know, this is exactly what he wanted. But then Luke refuses to kill Vader again, and he literally like throws his lightsaber away this time. And this is when Luke says he's a Jedi, like his father before him.
I'm a Jedi, like my father before me.
So that's the final answer. He faces his enemy twice, he makes a lightsaber, he spares his enemy's life, and then he throws away that lightsaber, and then he says, I'm a Jedi. So that's it. That's the criteria. I'm sticking with it. But then the Emperor pulls out this new power, a different power, the Force lightning. So I guess it turns out that the dark side is stronger and has extra powers, which does seem to fly right in the face of what Yoda said about it not being stronger. But I haven't seen anyone from the light side use lightning as a power, so I gotta give the point to the Emperor on this one. Luke seems to be able to take quite a bit of that Force lightning. I mean, he's suffering, but he's not dying instantly, which is kind of what you'd expect from even one hit with lightning. I can't remember what it is about electricity that actually causes the problems. It's like the amps or something. So maybe it's the voltage is high, but the current is low, or his resistance is high. Oh man. I really didn't cover this much in high school or study it ever since. But anyway, the Emperor saw Luke fulfilling his destiny. And I guess what he meant by that was that he saw that Luke would fulfill a destiny, but not what that fulfillment would be, because it seems like what actually ends up happening is Luke spares Vader's life, and then Vader kills the Emperor as a final act of redemption to save Luke. This is really good. I mean, I really enjoyed Vader's redemption. I love that he's the one who kills the Emperor and not Luke. The foreshadowing in the previous scenes makes this revelation feel earned. Luke was right about Vader still having good in him. Concealing the possibility wouldn't have made this scene more impactful. Foreshadowing doesn't necessarily ruin the surprise of Vader throwing the Emperor in the pit, presumably killing him. We can talk later if the Emperor's return ruins some of the impact of this moment, which, spoiler alert, it does. But even though there were moments in this film that supported this being a possibility, Vader's allegiance to Luke was left ambiguous enough that this is still a surprising outcome. The edit to the scene I mentioned earlier, where Luke tells us Vader's feelings are changing rather than showing us through action, might have tipped the scales too far towards Vader's redemption if it was shown in the way that I suggested, and it could have diminished the impact of this reveal. So all of my ideas are bad and I should feel bad.
Your music's bad and you should feel bad.
No, but there might have been some middle ground, some hint of changing allegiance through action that could have been easily dismissed as Vader returns to attacking Luke. I still don't think that would have been bad. But anyway, what we get is a surprisingly cathartic ending to Vader's character. You don't find yourself minding that Luke isn't the one to kill the big bad even. I love the moment afterwards where he looks upon Luke's face with his real face, his sad, damaged face, and his real voice as he tells Luke he was right about him, and to tell Leia he was right. And he smiles a little with his eyes, like knowing that he's done the right thing by his children in the end. And it's really powerful. It really delivers on the ending that I think we deserve. I think Darth Vader's death here at the hands of the Emperor while saving Luke was really the best possible answer to this setup. I think having the Emperor as the main villain all along works really well. The lack of development in the shadowy kind of comic book evil of the Emperor wouldn't have worked unless we also had someone more humanized in Darth Vader. The evil without any sort of nuance would have been less satisfying to watch, without Darth Vader's presence to remind us that the world between good and evil is more complicated than it is in children's stories. I sometimes get this impulse that comes from childhood, I think, of wanting everyone to live and wanting only good things to happen. Sometimes I'm watching something and I know exactly what's going to happen because I've seen it many times, and what's going to happen is that someone's going to make a really bad mistake or have a really bad idea, and then that's going to lead to some other part of the plot. And even in those cases, sometimes I'll be like, no, don't do it. Even though I know they're going to do it, and if they don't do it, the plot won't go anywhere. But we naturally have this aversion to conflict. But conflict is also what makes a story satisfying. And a sacrifice like Vader makes in the end is more satisfying, and all the better because he doesn't survive it. Luke already saved him. He saved him by being his motivation to turn away from evil and to stop the war and put an end to this madness, at least for a few years. And if Vader survived that, it would have weakened his sacrifice. So I think the Vader redemption and death is probably the strongest point in this movie. And again, it's probably the reason that most people enjoy this film, because it sticks the landing for the entire trilogy of conflict. And I don't think that even as good as the first two movies are, they would be remembered as fondly if this plot had not been resolved in such a satisfying way. But it's not the only good thing about this film. Part 2, The Imperial Trap. So, after the opening sequence with Jabba the Hutt, which I'll get to later, don't worry, the gang reunites with the rebellion and there's already a plan in motion. They're going to stop the second Death Star by taking an Imperial shuttle down through the Imperial fleet that's guarding the forest moon of Endor, which is where the shield generator that's protecting the second Death Star is located. If they can get past the Imperial force that's guarding Endor's moon and disable the shield generator, then they can basically just destroy the Death Star, which isn't fully constructed and it's vulnerable from a lot of different positions instead of just the one like the first Death Star. So I like this setup, despite the fact that there's a second Death Star in it, which I'm getting there. But while it's basically the same conflict and same goal as the first film, this has a little bit of a heist element to it, a sneak mission per se, that the first Death Star destruction didn't really have. I like that our whole gang is together and they're going to go together, even though it doesn't really make a lot of sense because all of our heroes are known to the Imperials at this point. I mean, they're not only known, they're probably like the galaxy's most wanted prime suspects, number 1 through 6 or whatever. So they probably should have been plan B here. I think this would have been a little stronger if there had been a plan involving a bunch of no-names that would have failed, and then our heroes could have been plan B, and Luke could have argued that Vader would let him pass, so he should go, and then Han and Leia would have to go too because they're Ron and Hermione. But anyway, Han volunteers, everyone joins him, and it's very cheesy. Everyone's a general now, and we're gonna go do it. And some of the acting is just really not great here. The writing isn't great either. It's just kind of clunky and obvious, and they're explaining the plan in the way that you usually do if the plan is gonna fail. It doesn't go exactly like they say here, but it's pretty close. But hey, everyone's together. And, but we can't take the Millennium Falcon because of course we can't. They know that ship. And so we got to take this Imperial shuttle, and they've got the code that's going to get them through the Imperial fleet. And the whole scene in the shuttle is really good. They're flying together again as a group, and they're interacting with each other, and they've got cute little things to say to each other, like fly casual.
Keep your distance though, Chewie, but don't look like you're trying to keep your distance. I don't know. Fly casual.
But then Luke senses Vader.
Vader's on that ship.
Which maybe they should have foreseen, although they were just thinking the Emperor was going to be there, and the Emperor can't seem to sense Luke for some reason. So maybe that wasn't as big of a concern as I was thinking. But Vader lets him go so he can deal with them himself. So once they're on the ground on this moon of Endor, they really don't spend enough time together as a group. I wish they would have gotten just a little bit longer before they split up, but they pretty quickly fail their stealth mission because Han steps on a fucking branch, which is really dumb. But it sets up the speeder chase scene, which is super cool. And it was really cool how this was actually filmed. I mean, obviously they're in front of a green screen, but the backgrounds were shot actually by the guy who invented the Steadicam. And he was just like carrying this camera through the woods, taking less than a frame a second. So it would make it seem like they were going way faster and like impossibly fast through this forest. The speed chase scene is pretty good. It's also a little silly. At one point, Luke tells Leia they can jam the comm links using a switch. Wait, why is there a switch on these speeders that let them jam their own comms? Why would they need that functionality? And then, like, why does Luke not just use the Force to get out of this situation? But we'll come back to that idea in a minute. But the chase is good. It's different than anything they had in the previous films. It sounds amazing with surround sound. They omitted the music, and it really works with all the roars from the engines and the flashes of the blaster fire and the explosions. And then after the speeder chase is done, Luke is back with Han for some reason, which I don't really understand because it seems like he went a really long way. I guess they went in a circle, but Leia's out on her own. I do think this would have been better if either they were all together again or all separated, and then it might have been a little more tense when they're trying to get back together. But just one little side note, you kind of wonder why they didn't have any stormtrooper armor during any of this, because they managed to get the ship and the code, but they couldn't be bothered to get some armor. It seems like that would have been pretty easy to get. I mean, they just took out a whole bunch of guys on speeders, so couldn't they just go back and kind of be like, do you have any armor I could take? You don't seem to be using it anymore. But anyway, I think in general, the Imperial Trap like setup here, the scenes that we get with Luke and Han and Leia and Chewie and R2 and C-3PO, they were what people were really looking for in this movie, and the last one didn't really have many scenes like that because Luke was separated from the plot for the most part. There are some kind of cringy moments in here that I'll talk a little bit more about in some of the other sections, but for the most part, the actual scenes with our heroes as they're trying to do their sneak mission to take out the shield generator work. And the whole setup of this being an Imperial trap, I think, works nicely too. The rebels come across this intelligence, well, not easily. Supposedly a lot of Bothans, I think, died for it.
Many Bothans died to bring us this information.
Which was smart of the Empire to not just let them have it. The Empire isn't completely incompetent. They came up with this trap and they executed it pretty well. The rebels certainly fall for it. I will say that one issue that I have with it is that the trap plan The part where they told them that if you disabled the shield generator, then you can destroy the second Death Star, that probably shouldn't have worked. They lied about the Death Star being non-operational. It is operational, although it doesn't seem to be quite as strong as the previous Death Star because it can barely take out a single ship now, let alone an entire planet. But the plan to destroy that Death Star shouldn't have worked, right? Like, taking out the shield generator shouldn't have been the necessary thing to attack the Death Star, and they shouldn't have just been able to attack the Death Star so easily. It feels like if you're going to feed someone some intelligence as a trap, you should be feeding them a little bit more false intelligence than just the Death Star doesn't work. But otherwise, I think the idea behind the trap is pretty good, and it's, again, different from the previous two films. I mean, Luke gets caught in a trap in Empire, but he more or less knows that it's a trap, but goes anyway. The rebels were really fooled here. But let's move on to Part 3, the love triangle. In my previous review of Empire, I said that the love triangle was more or less squashed in that film, but that really wasn't the case. I think I just sort of forgot all the parts of this movie that weren't Vader killing the Emperor, but the resolution of the love triangle really isn't bad in this one. Luke realizes Leia is his sister during a conversation with Obi-Wan about who the other was that could be their last hope. A line that I referenced in my review of Empire, so I guess we have a definitive answer. They meant Leia there. And he comes to the conclusion that it's Leia, probably because Leia is one of the only named female characters up to this point.
That is the reason why your sister remains safely anonymous.
Leia. Leia's my sister.
Sure, Luke Holmes. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Luke finally tells her, after a fairly silly scene with the Ewoks, in a jarring change of tone that really could have happened at a more serious moment, but then serious moments are pretty few and far between in this film. So they have this fairly serious revelation with implications for both characters and their parents and their past, and Leia's reaction always cracks me up.
I know. Somehow, I've always known.
And you're like, Leia, did you? Like, did you though? Oh, Leia. Then what was with all the kissing? Oh no, Leia. Girl, no. But I actually think that that moment could have worked with like 2 additional lines. I think all they had to do was give Luke an always, like a little knowing, always Leia. And then she could like playfully hit him or something and be like, you know what I mean. And okay, it doesn't have to be that cheesy, but you get the idea. It could have just been a lighter moment to bring us back to the generally very light and silly tone of this film. Establish that brother-sister kind of banter. Leia being Luke's sister isn't my favorite thing about the film, more on that later, but it does shut the shippers up, at least most of them, and for that, I'm grateful. I also like Han's reaction after, when Leia won't tell him, and he's initially jealous, but apologizes almost immediately. And later, when Leia finally reveals to him that Luke, the guy that he's been worried about, is her brother, before he even finds it out, he's really gracious. He's like, oh, you know, I get it. You guys can be together. I won't get in the way. Which is nice. It's nice that Han has had that kind of development where instead of being upset by this, he cares about her enough to let her go so that she can be happy. So that's really nice. And he's really happy to find out that he's the one when she tells him the truth about Luke. So he's kind of the one by process of elimination, but he doesn't seem to mind. I also like Han finally saying I love you to Leia during the otherwise way too long part when they're trying to get into the bunker. They don't really get as much character growth and development in this movie as they did in Empire, but you can see how Han is starting to feel safe with Leia now, and they've had a chance for their relationship to grow. And the fact that he does it right before she's about to have a super badass moment where she takes out some guys at point blank range.
I love you.
I know.
Hands up! Stand up!
I think fits with Han's character really nicely. And her "I know" response is such a great echo of the previous scene. It's not nearly as emotionally impactful as Leia's "I love you," but it's a really nice coda to their love story. And I generally think that Han and Leia ending up together was the right call. Luke and Leia having some kind of connection makes sense. I like that they have a connection still at the end of it, that he's not just the loser in the love triangle, he's still really close friends with his sister Leia and Han, at least for some short period of time. Damn you, sequels! You ruined my dreams. But I'm glad that's the way the love triangle concludes. So I'm going to move on to part 4, which is something that I have sort of mixed feelings about, but I'm just going to go ahead and title this fairly positively. Part 4, In Defense of the Ewoks. So the Ewoks get a lot of shit from a lot of people who think that they're silly teddy bear merchandising opportunities, that they are the bad thing in this otherwise really good and very serious film. And to those people, I say, you are wrong. Sorry, you're just wrong. There are problems with the Ewoks, and I'm going to talk about them in a second. But the problem with them is not that they're cute. It's not that they're silly and goofy, because there is so much in this film that is just as goofy. No, goofier. And I think that the way that the Ewoks are introduced is really adorable. I like that the Ewok that finds Leia is suspicious of her at first, but then she shares food with it to befriend it. And it made me think of when you see a stray cat or something outside and it's worried about you and it's scared. And then you get your food out and it's like, oh, okay, we can be friends. And it was very cute. And I think that thematically, the Ewoks serve a similar purpose to Yoda, the small, unassuming creature that the Empire completely underestimates and ignores. I think it works from the same perspective of a whole race of sentient beings that they don't even pay any attention to when they land on this moon because they're cute and tribal and they're still in spears and bows and arrows, and so they pose no threat, but then they do pose a threat. And the threat is the problem with them, but I'm getting there, I promise. First, some more Ewok love. I love that the Ewoks worship C-3PO. That's my boy. This is C-3PO's Jerry from Parks and Rec has a big dick moment, and I'm here for it. I love that C-3PO gets his moment where he's the king of all of them, and I love that his programming stops him from impersonating a deity. That's a very specific program, but I love that C-3PO won't use the influence he has over the Ewoks to get Luke and Han out of the situation where they're going to be killed, but he still lets the Ewoks worship him, even though he says that his programming won't let him do that. I guess he can allow them to worship him, but he won't wield that power because of his programming. Either way, for whatever reason that C-3PO does this, I think he deserves this moment of letting the heroes squirm after they've talked down to him the whole time. So good on the Ewoks.
Game recognized, game!
I think the distraction scene works, where an Ewok creates a distraction by stealing the speeder in the first of the many scenes where they're trying to break into the door of the shield generator bunker. I think that's a really good use of the Ewoks because they're just causing a distraction and causing problems. But this is where the problem happens. They take it too far with what the Ewoks are capable of here. I get that this was like a forced Vietnam metaphor, and that this is supposed to be the farmers in rural Vietnam defeating the US military with primitive weapons, which is a thing that happened. But they didn't just defeat them in an open field of battle.
Only a fool would meet the Dothraki in an open field.
That's not how guerrilla warfare works. I just think that Ewoks are too powerful here with their primitive weapons. They shouldn't be as effective as they're shown to be. Maybe if they were using guerrilla tactics and hiding in tunnels, and okay, they do set some traps. Or maybe if they had overwhelming numbers and were suicidal because C-3PO told them to be or something. I don't know. Maybe that could work. Maybe it would be believable that they could defeat the Imperials, but I also don't really think they should have won against the Imperials. I mean, it would be good if they were able to hold on for long enough for the rebel forces to come down and save the day. That could have worked. Or maybe they could have been the ones to break into the shield generator because they're small and can evade notice. And that would have fit with the theme as well. But either way, I wish they hadn't been so critical in the fight. And I definitely think the scenes that show that the Ewoks are taking casualties are not great. Like, who wants to see a dead teddy bear? This is not a thing that anyone wants to see, especially not the children that this was supposed to appeal to. Like, I get that they're saying there's a real cost for these little teddy bears, but also they're teddy bears. I don't want to see them die. Why did they include that? But I don't think the Ewoks are what ruined this film. They're way overpowered, but they're pretty cute, And I like the idea that the Empire underestimates them conceptually, even if the execution is lacking. Alright, so those were the good things that I could say about this movie. It's time to complain. Part 5. Guess we're out of ideas. So, this is the third Star Wars film. The first film came out just 6 years earlier, and somehow they're already out of ideas.
We've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.
So I think something really strange about the Star Wars universe is that it feels simultaneously enormous, just massive in scale and scope. That space opera feel of just nearly infinite planets and races and types of people and possibilities and technology and magic, and it just feels like there's something different and new around every single corner of the universe. And yet it also feels like we don't ever really see very much of that. We keep kind of revisiting the same places over and over. We keep having the same kind of characters. We keep having the same kind of conflict. We keep using the same kind of ship or the same kind of ground unit. We keep seeing the same soldiers. We keep hearing the same lines. We keep seeing some of the same establishing shots. We keep having the same villain. We keep having the same technology. We keep having the same super weapons. It just feels like every time you have one of these movies, you're like, there's going to be something different and original that completely changes the way you think about Star Wars. And occasionally, we do get something new. But so often, the new thing is just some rehash of what we already have. I mean, look at the Ewoks. They were supposed to be Wookiees originally, and the Ewoks compared to the Wookiees, they're pretty similar. I mean, it's not the same, but the Ewoks aren't the most original concept ever of sentient, furry creatures that act a little animal-like. The opening shot here of the Star Destroyer flying overhead. Man, that was so good in A New Hope, so let's just do it again. Did you see it? The Star Destroyer? It's there. Do you see the Star Destroyer? And it's like, okay, but do we have to start them exactly the same way? And then we're right on to the second Death Star, which, why? Another Death Star? Didn't the first one take years to construct? Like, maybe even decades? I mean, they're complaining about construction taking too long, but how long has it actually been? I think it's supposed to have been 1 year between the events of Empire Strikes Back and the beginning of this movie, so it's only been 4 years since the destruction of the original Death Star. I mean, this is a lot of work that they managed to get done in that short amount of time. And where do they even get the resources to build this? And sure, you can argue that making the second one of something is always faster than making the first. But still, I feel like this just would have been better if we didn't have a second Death Star, because it just made everything feel the same to me. And then the fact that we end up having a third Death Star, that's not called a Death Star, I guess, in episode 7 is really annoying too. Something different here would have been more interesting, even if it's just that they're going to make a second Death Star, but they haven't started construction yet. And I'll talk about this a little more later as a possibility, but I think it would have been a lot more interesting to have something other than the Death Star be the place where the final battle happens. I mean, ultimately the fact that Luke and the Emperor and Darth Vader are on the second Death Star isn't really important or even noticeable in that final scene. They're in a room, they're inside, they're in an interior of some kind of spaceship. The fact that they're on the Death Star doesn't really seem to matter. So I wish we would have just had something that wasn't the Death Star. On other things that are kind of repetitive of the original film and don't really add much here, I've got to go with Leia's relationship to Luke. I talked a little bit earlier about how Leia's relationship to Luke helps to motivate Luke towards fighting Darth Vader, and it also resolves the love triangle without Luke just being the loser of everything. So those are not nothing, but also it doesn't feel as important or as impactful as the other concealed identities. We talked a little bit about concealed identities in my Empire review. If you compare this reveal with Ben Kenobi revealing that he's Obi-Wan and that he knew Luke's father and that he knew Darth Vader and all the connections between the plot and Luke, who's grown up just thinking that he's isolated from this whole universe. But actually, that guy Ben Kenobi that he's known his whole life has been really close all along. And I think that's really impactful to the plot and the theme and the conflict in the first film. Or you have Yoda's reveal that he's actually Yoda and not just some weird little alien creature that's bothering Luke. And that ties in thematically to judging on appearances and underestimating the power of the individual. And then you have Darth Vader revealing that he's Luke's father, which adds a whole layer to the conflict between them. But Leia's reveal as Luke's sister doesn't really go far enough for me. Yes, Darth Vader says he'll just go and get Leia. And that makes Luke mad, and that whole scene plays out really well. but her existence as Luke's sister doesn't really matter that much. I mean, she's never really shown an interest in the Force. Maybe she has Force powers when Luke calls her on Bespin, but it's not clear whether she actually needs to have some sort of Force powers or not for that to happen. It doesn't seem to really go anywhere, and it doesn't reinforce any of the themes of the story. And how Luke finds out doesn't add much to it either. Luke returns to Yoda to complete his training, which apparently he actually doesn't need to do, because who fucking knows what you need to do to be a Jedi. But anyway, Yoda tells Luke to pass on what he's learned, that the Force is strong in his family, which wouldn't it have been nice if Luke had had some kids? You got me again, sequels! But no, there's another Skywalker right now. And then Obi-Wan is the one who tells him. Obi-Wan had told Luke that Vader killed his father before, so now they have to justify that deception through this little retconning. And so Ghost Obi-Wan says, well...
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Is this some, like, alt-right bullshit, Obi-Wan? Is Obi-Wan Kenobi the Ben Shapiro of Star Wars? Or, like, Kellyanne Conway? Are these his alternate facts?
Alternative facts to that. But the point remains...
Wait a minute, alternative facts?
Is Luke denying Obi-Wan's truth? Like, Obi-Wan's not willing to admit that he lied. He could have just said that he didn't tell Luke because Luke wasn't ready. And there's some other parts that just don't really make sense with the prequels, where Anakin was Obi-Wan's good friend, and that when Obi-Wan first got to know him, Anakin was a great pilot, so shouldn't Anakin have been a lot older? I mean, I guess little Anakin is technically a pilot. I don't know. I don't think that the situation that Obi-Wan sets up here really aligns with what the prequels give us. But back to Leia. We get to the part where Yoda spoke about Leia when he said that there was another, and Luke figures that out using those powers of deduction. But why do we even see this? Is this so that they could set up Leia as a possibility to kill Darth Vader if Luke went to the dark side, which is something they hinted at in the marketing? Or was there a draft of the script where it's more like Luke is tempted to the dark side, but his love for his sister pulls him back to the light, but then they decided not to lean super hard on that? Like, I could see maybe if Leia was there with him in the throne room and she's the thing that brings him back to the light, maybe that could have worked somehow. But unfortunately, it just doesn't go very far here. Or in those damn sequels! Part 6, the special edition. Alright, I'm going to come back to one of the largest changes because I just want to quickly touch on some other things in this section. At the very end, it's all the special edition changes that are really annoying. Like the celebrations across the galaxy. Is that Naboo? Is that a Gungan? Is this the city from Blade Runner? Is Blade Runner in the Star Wars universe now? Was this on purpose because Harrison Ford was in that movie too? Are we also going to get wherever the hell they are in Indiana Jones the next time they redo this? And then they changed the song at the end, which frankly the original was also bad. But the new song is really forgettable. If you're gonna change it, why didn't they just make like a tiki bar version of the Force theme or the Imperial March in a major key or something memorable for this final scene? And then Luke sees the Force ghosts and Anakin's really young and you're kind of like, why? Why is Anakin young? But like, Yoda and Obi-Wan are old. Why is it not Ewan McGregor up there? I guess the Force makes you into whichever version of you is the sexiest. No shade there to Ewan. He's a pretty good looking guy, but he's no Alec Guinness. But the worst of the changes happen in what I feel is the worst part of the film. Part 7, Jabba the Hutt. Alright. So this is my unpopular opinion about Star Wars, or at least it's one of them. This is a somewhat spicy take, but man, I hate everything that happens in the beginning of this movie with Jabba the Hutt. Everyone seems to love this part, and for me, it just does not work at all. It works less and less every time I see it, and it's not just the changes they made in the special edition, where they add the dancers to a different stupid song. And another pointless Boba Fett scene, and all the other cringy stuff. For me, the Jabba the Hutt stuff doesn't work for a couple of reasons. One is that it really drags. I think this section is just way too long. It is 30 minutes long in a 2-hour movie. Why? It's also super 80s, but not in like the cool, fun, thriller kind of 80s way, but in the extremely cheesy afternoon special kind of 80s way, where no one really wanted to revisit this part of the 80s. It doesn't give me nostalgic giggles to watch now. Okay, I wasn't alive for most of the 80s, but it just makes me cringe and want to switch it off. And when I watched this recently, I just thought to myself, how did I wipe this from my memory? I thought this film was pretty good, and I just basically completely forgot that this part of it even existed. I don't know what I did to make that happen, but I really hope I'm going to be able to do it again. The way that this dance situation happens, the musical number, it just reminds me a lot of Cats, actually. Specifically, the really cringy Jenny Anydot scene with the roaches dancing, and just something about it is just so bad and so wrong. There's nothing redeeming about it, and therefore it reminds me of Cats. Actually, it's worse, because Cats sometimes passes that cult classic threshold for me into it's so unbelievably bad, it's kind of good, which is another spicy take, I guess. But anyway, I don't understand who the audience of this movie was supposed to be. Is this supposed to be for 2-year-olds now? What is with all the slapstick? Why is this all so silly? The previous movies appealed to children, but I compared the first movie, A New Hope, to the first Harry Potter book, and Empire Strikes Back to the fourth Harry Potter book, and that we were getting more mature in tone. And I guess someone was like, if you get any more mature, it's not going to appeal to kids, so you better dial it back. So instead of going from like a movie that appealed to 10-year-olds, and then appealing to 14-year-olds, and then appealing to like 16 or 17-year-olds, you know, the age that the original fans would be by now, they decided to take this one right on back to preschool. I hate kids stuff that really underestimates how intelligent kids are. Kids are surprisingly smart, and they're surprisingly good at understanding the complexities of stories. They don't need things to be dumbed down for them to understand or enjoy them. They don't need a shitload of cheesy slapstick humor to find things entertaining. Like, that does work, but it's just not necessary for something to appeal to kids, especially if you're trying to get a broader appeal to their families as well. This is supposed to be a family-friendly thing, so sure, throw in a couple of things there just to make the kids laugh. But kids like watching stories about people who are older than them. They like watching more mature stories. I mean, look at Disney movies, for example. All of the protagonists are teenagers or even older. Look at Aladdin, who ends up in the bottom of the ocean during that one part of the film, chained and unconscious. Look at Beauty and the Beast, which culminates in a fight scene to the death with someone falling off a roof. Or look at The Lion King, where someone's uncle murders his father to really begin the story, and where the story ends in another fight to the death, where the villain is eaten alive. And yes, those events largely happen off screen, but they clearly happen. We don't really need to dial back conflicts and make things super silly to appeal to kids. Each of those movies has at least 1 or 2 slapstick, funny, silly songs and moments in it, but it's not the whole freaking film. And yeah, there are some serious parts in Return of the Jedi. The parts I talked about liking were pretty serious, but there's just way more slapstick in this movie than it really needed. Another thing that's a problem is the amount of time it takes to establish that Jabba is weird and gross before anything happens. It's just drags and drags and drags as he's just lurking and hanging out with the ladies, and finally something starts happening when the bounty hunter comes in and threatens to kill them all if they don't get more money, which Jabba likes, and spoilers, it's Princess Leia in disguise. And oh, look, it's Lando in disguise too, and everyone's in disguise. Lando and Chewie, by the way, their failure to retrieve Han happened off screen. I'm okay with this because most of these movies start in medias res, where the action has already commenced by the time we step into the story. But it sure has been a long time. They've all been here for an entire year, which seems absurd. And somehow Chewie wasn't captured, I guess, because Leia brings him in as her bounty. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. They cut a scene here before we end up at Jabba's palace where Luke is being called to through the Force by Darth Vader as he's making a new lightsaber and planning on the way he's going to get in. I wish they hadn't cut this. I think the scene's actually pretty good, and if I were going to restore one scene to the movie with special edition, I think it would be this one, where we're reminded who Luke is and his connection to Darth Vader and what he's capable of, and see some sort of planning from him before this whole interminable nonsense happens. Considering that they've had a year to make this rescue plan, it sure is not great. It doesn't seem like they really know what they're planning to do to get Han back. I mean, okay, we send in R2-D2 and C-3PO to get access to Jabba's palace, because they know they'll just turn away Luke or Leia, I guess, which, okay, that works. And then Leia comes disguised as a bounty hunter, so that's cool. But wait, why did she come separately from the droids again? It was something about C-3PO and R2-D2 were presents from Luke, but that didn't really seem to go anywhere or do much. I guess maybe all that was there just to get Luke's lightsaber in, because they would have removed the weapon at the door, which it just seems like the moment they took Luke's lightsaber away, he could have just wiped the floor with everyone there, or used a Jedi mind trick to be able to take his weapon in, because he uses a Jedi mind trick to gain entry in the first place. But okay, let's say Luke is not trying to come in fighting in case Jabba executes Han or something before they can get to him. So Leia comes in as a bounty hunter, and she sure doesn't know how to operate the carbonite freezing sarcophagus thing, and I'm not sure I would have known, but sure, okay, he's fine, temporarily blind. The reveal that it's Leia is pretty good, but Jabba has been watching Leia all along from behind the curtain, and also like every other person and alien in this freaking palace is here too. Like, is she blind? How did she not hear or see anyone while she was doing the whole getting him out of carbonite thing? Leia really has some terrible situational awareness. Like, think about when you've gone to a surprise party. When you walk into the room, I've never actually had a surprise party thrown for me, but I've been the one to walk someone in the room before. But anyway, you know instantly that there are people in the room. I mean, think about playing hide and seek. You can tell if people are there. They make noise, they cough, they breathe, they move just slightly. You can see something out of the corner of your eye. But no, Leia didn't hear or see anything, I guess. So Han is in prison now with Chewie. Why does Han call Luke crazy?
Luke's crazy. He can't even take care of himself, much less rescue anybody.
A Jedi Knight. I'm out of it for a little while. Everybody gets delusions of grandeur.
Yeah, Han saved Luke a couple of times, but that wasn't because Luke was incompetent, and Han has never really shown this kind of disdain for Luke before. I guess it's meant to be a joke, but it doesn't really work for me, especially after the genuine moments of concern they have in Empire. The tone just feels too light here, way lighter than it felt before. So, alright, everyone's been caught, and now we have Slave Leia. Well, Slave Leia. I don't know. I don't even know how to feel about Slave Leia at this point. There was a point where, early in my teenage years, where my own sexuality was budding, where I found things like Slave Leia super appealing because they were empowering. A woman, sexy, beautiful, but also strong and powerful, and she literally chokes Jabba to death with her slave chain. And don't you feel empowered now? Wasn't that objectification worth it? I mean, it does tie thematically to the slave that is Darth Vader essentially taking down the Emperor, so it's got that going for it. But otherwise, I don't know. It's complicated. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who argue that Slave Leia is a feminist icon. You know, she's been objectified, but she gets her power back. But the older I get, the more I just kind of hate these gratuitous scenes where women are just put on display like this. Even in cases like this, where it does tie back to some kind of empowering message. It feels kind of gross. Like, oh, well, we've got our lead actress and one of the only named female characters in this whole thing to wear practically nothing and be incredibly and miserably uncomfortable in this awful metal suit for hours. But don't you feel like she's gonna solve feminism for us? Because reasons? I mean, I think I would have less of an issue with this if she wasn't like the only woman in these movies. And yes, don't at me about Mon Mothma. She's just there for exposition, and her line delivery is pretty rough.
The Emperor's made a critical error, and the time for our attack has come.
Is there any real character behind her at this point? Not really. So Leia is our only real female character, and seeing her practically naked feels wrong.
Mint chocolate M&M's premiums.
know. I just don't love it anymore. So then Luke just kind of walks in, Jedi mind tricking, what's his face? That guy. Bib Fortuna. Did I make that up? Sometimes you say these like Star Wars names a bunch of times and they just don't even sound real anymore. But I think that guy's name is Bib Fortuna. So why didn't Luke come in the first place? Why did he send in the B team, especially after it's been a year? Luke tries his Jedi mind trick on Jabba, but it doesn't work because, well, that's not explained. And so he immediately fails. Why is everyone so stupid? Like, why was his plan so bad? Why does Leia have no situational awareness? Why is Luke just bad at everything all of a sudden? Like, why does this section make it out like Jabba is some criminal mastermind genius and not some gross punk-ass gangster? Like, it's just really kind of annoying that they're defeated not by the Emperor or Darth Vader, but by Jabba the fucking Hutt. Alright, so Luke is standing on a trapdoor and he gets sent into the Rancor pit. Luke. Oh, Luke. Did we just forget about the Force? I'm getting to that. I'm coming to that. So Luke picks up a big bone like a fucking caveman and he wedges the thing's mouth open for like half a second. And what is the point of any of this? It's really 30 minutes, this part. This whole ordeal lasts for 30 minutes. 30. I imagine this was meant to be something similar to the second Guardians of the Galaxy movie, where all the Guardians are fighting whatever monster that is in the beginning, and it's a short scene that introduces us to each of the characters and what their abilities are and what their relationships are to each other. And that could have really worked here if it was like that, but this is so long and it doesn't show us what the characters' abilities are. I mean, Luke literally throws a rock to hit a button to crush the Rancor. He doesn't use the Force at all. Hold on, getting there. Alright, so the Rancor pit is done, but they're not out of it yet because now they're all gonna be killed in the Sarlacc pit. Why are there so many pits? But okay, so Luke is like, this is the last mistake you'll ever make.
The last mistake you'll ever make.
Which is very intimidating. Ooh, Luke, we're scared. You've been so impressive so far. You've been so effective. Then there's another terrible party on the way to the Sarlacc pit. Oh, this is so bad and so cringy. It reminds me of Mac and Me, that terrible E.T. ripoff that was basically just a McDonald's commercial. I mean, just burn my eyes out. Somehow this music and the music at the very end never quite makes it into the live action concerts, at least not from what I can remember from the one I went to, I guess, more than a decade ago. I wonder why that could be. So Luke says he's taken care of everything, right? Why did he wait until they're in this much worse situation to pull out all of his cool Jedi stuff, with the Force and the lightsaber? Couldn't he have just done this back at the palace? Now the odds are really much worse for them. Jabba has a ship that they should be able to just fly away. It's a barge, but for some reason they just stay there even though things are going poorly. And now everyone has this chance that they're gonna fall into this pit. I mean, we've raised our stakes, but why? And then this fight is just weird and cheesy and Boba Fett. I know, I've heard what happens in the Book of Boba Fett, which has just started while I'm making this review, and I haven't seen it yet. But his fate here, at least as far as we know at the end of this film, is that he's accidentally killed by Han when he's knocked into this pit by accident. It's a complete accident. So remind me again why everyone loves this guy so much. He says like 3 lines in the entire thing, and then he gets murdered by mistake. Like, he doesn't have a cool, heroic death. He just unceremoniously falls into the pit. I know that there's a reckoning right now for this particular plot point, but I just don't understand the Boba Fett worship, other than he's got a cool suit. Another spicy take, I guess. So this whole setup with the skiff and the pit is pretty much just a pirate movie, and they're just walking the plank, and the action here is fine. There's one really good moment in this. I told you I was going to talk about things that I liked. So the one part of this that I do like is when Luke gets hit by a blaster bolt in his hand. And he reacts, but then he keeps going like nothing's happened. And I was like, wow, he sure doesn't feel anything. And then I remembered, oh, that's his fake hand. It's the hand that he got in the last movie after Darth Vader cut his real hand off. And so that's why he didn't act like he was hurt. And then they confirmed that in the next scene, and I was like, okay, that was good. That was a good moment, that callback to the previous film in a way that was cool and integrated into the action. I really enjoyed that. But as far as what's happening in this movie, there's just a whole lot of nothing with one important element. Something that flows through us, and something that binds us, and something that does that other thing that Yoda says. Part 8. We kind of forgot about the Force.
Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet.
So what happened to the Force in this movie? You remember the Force, right? Like, that was a thing in the previous films. But in this film, it's kind of like Luke forgot the Force existed and that was a power that he had. He doesn't even use it for really basic things. I mean, he tries, I guess, at least with Jabba the Hutt, but that doesn't work for some reason and it's not explained, and he doesn't really try to use it otherwise, other than just that mind trick. There are a lot of things you felt like Luke could have used in that room or that Rancor pit. He could have called something to him through the Force, weapons or rocks. They move a lot of rocks with the Force in a lot of scenes in Star Wars for some reason.
It's not about lifting rocks.
But Luke doesn't do that here. Instead, he literally picks up a rock with his hand. He could pick up the rock with the Force and then hit the thing with the rock, and you're just like, why doesn't he do that? And then in the speeder chase scene, couldn't Luke use the Force on the stormtroopers to get away? Couldn't he do a mind trick before they start attacking them after Han accidentally alerts them? Also, why did they turn back and start chasing Luke and the others at all? Weren't those stormtroopers scouts? Shouldn't they have just gone and told the others about these guys being there? And then, okay, there is one more graphic scene in this that I'd forgotten about. I don't know if I just don't have a good memory for like violence or gore or whatever at this point, but when Chewie gets them caught in the trap, it's because he's like trying to eat some gross dead animal carcass thing, and so they're up in that net, and then Han has to help Luke get his lightsaber out of his pocket. Why can't Luke just use the Force? Why can't he just use the Force to call the saber into his hand? Like the thing he does in the cave with the snow and the Empire. Like, when things are stuck in your pocket, the Force doesn't work, but in, like, the snow and ice, okay, and even in the pyre burning situation, when they're about to be burned up by the Ewoks, he only remembers that he has the Force after they've tried, like, everything else, right? And then he uses the Force to make C-3PO fly, which is... It's okay, it's fine. It's silly. And it seems like there were probably a lot of options here, but you know what? It's cute. It's funny. It doesn't end up in slaughtering any teddy bears. And if this had been the only silly scene in the movie or just one of a few, it would have worked and been really funny. But there's just so many. But yeah, I don't know why Mr. I'm not a Jedi, but I'm gonna be a Jedi someday if I can fulfill these very ambiguous criteria that no one wants to explain to me properly, just stops using the Force in this film. But it's annoying that he does. Part 9, bad endings. So again, I don't think this is really a bad ending to the overall story of the original trilogy. I do think that it ends the A-plot story in a satisfying way. There are things that could have maybe been improved, but overall the A-plot, Darth Vader, Emperor, Luke, that conflict really works from start to finish through the whole original trilogy. But the rest of this film just really struggles for me. And I wanted to think a little bit about how when something ends in a less than satisfying way, especially when there's a quality dip towards the end of a work, how impactful it is on the staying power of the original work in the cultural consciousness, and how I personally feel about the work as a whole. I think what's really interesting about this movie is I'd forgotten most of the bad parts and the fluff and the silly moments and the unnecessarily long scenes and the parts where it dragged and the parts where it just really does not stand up to the quality of the original two films. All that I really remembered was the good parts. And I think this is because the resolution to the main story is the thing that works here. If instead of getting a satisfying resolution to the main story, we'd gotten a satisfying resolution to the plots, the rebellion, or Han and Jabba the Hutt, if we'd gotten a really good version of those and a really terrible version of Luke, Darth Vader, and the Emperor, I think people wouldn't think back on this film as fondly, and maybe wouldn't have wanted to revisit Star Wars at all. So sticking the landing on the A-plot seems to me to be the critical determining factor in whether or not something is worth rewatching. I don't rewatch, and will probably never again rewatch Game of Thrones, because, hold on, spoilers for Game of Thrones, the ending of Game of Thrones, all of Game of Thrones from here. You've been warned. The Game of Thrones ending, who ends up on the Iron Throne, what ends up happening in the final battles, the Long Night, who ends up killing the Night King, the answers to the overarching story questions, the things that have been happening since the first page of the first book are so bad, so dissatisfying, even just conceptually. Like, I'm not even just talking about the execution and how rushed they are, but how little they make sense to the overall story and how terrible they are to watch. Just completely ruined the entire show for me, because you can't go back and watch the first seasons of Game of Thrones and think, well, I guess this long night is actually going to just be one single night, so it makes sense that all this time was spent building up to it, because it's so long and impactful and dramatic. I mean, it's just a huge letdown, right? And so when you know that all the stuff with the White Walkers ends stupidly easily, the things that were just really good and creepy and suspenseful don't work anymore. They're unsatisfying to watch now. And ditto with the Iron Throne situation. You're seeing all these people contending for the throne that you think might be worthy of it. You've got Daenerys, you've got Jon Snow, Tyrion, you've got, I mean, even Sansa. I would say even Sansa before Bran. Bran, though. Like, and the worst part of that is that I can see, looking back at the books, that that is definitely what George R.R. Martin intended. And I still hate it. I hate Bran, the three-eyed raven on the Iron Throne. I don't care how good the buildup is. I would still hate it. And so every other Iron Throne scene, which is like 90% of Game of Thrones, is just really shitty to watch afterwards, because Bran is the one who wins it in the end. And all the rest of this stuff is just pointless nonsense. So if the Emperor won or something, whatever would have subverted my expectations here in the modern sense in Star Wars, if the Emperor had defeated Luke and Darth Vader and taken over the rebellion and reunited the galaxy that way, let's just say, I would have hated all of Star Wars forever, because it would have been a terrible disappointment to the story that had captivated me and so many people. So I think that this movie is able to at least stick the most important part of the landing was critical to the continued success of the franchise. I just wish that it had stuck more of the rest of the landing, and I'm going to talk about that here in my final part. Part 10, The Script Doctor of the Jedi. Alright, so this is my version of Return of the Jedi. It keeps as many of the plots, characters, themes of the original as I could, while I think improving the story in most ways. It's not flawless, and it's pretty basic, but I do think it would have solved most of the problems while keeping most of what they had, and especially the good stuff that they had, intact. So the first thing I do is eliminate the time jump. It's only been a few weeks since the end of Empire Strikes Back rather than a year, and we'd start with Darth Vader, just like we do in the film, but rather than arriving at the second Death Star, he's arriving at the Kyber crystal mining operation. They haven't built the second Death Star yet, but they're mining the most important ingredient, the crystals that are the same as the ones in the lightsaber that power the superweapon. So they've got this enormous mining operation. I'm just going to keep it on the moon of Endor for now, because why not? The Kyber crystal mining operation is something where there's both the planetary component on the ground, but they also have the fleet. So they've got like units on the ground hauling stuff off, but then they've also got like equipment and refining stuff in the air, some new kind of different ships and new different technology and things that we haven't really seen before. They need enormous crystals to power the new Death Star, but enormous crystals are super rare. So they've basically scoured this planet and taken down the forests and destroyed the Ewoks' homes in order to find these very rare, super large crystals. I guess it's kind of like Avatar, the movie Avatar, not the Airbender. So that's kind of where things start. And otherwise, it plays out more or less the same. Darth Vader tells the commander here that the Emperor's taking interest in the success of this mission, and he's going to come and check on it, and he lays out the same kind of conflict. Then we switch to the rebels, and they're in the Jabba situation, but we shorten that greatly. The whole purpose of this, again, is to quickly reestablish the characters and the relationships they have with each other, and to make Jabba a memorable first act villain that doesn't overstay his welcome. Luke and Leia are going to find everyone because they haven't heard back from Chewie and Lando. Again, it's only been a few weeks. Chewie and Lando had been sending back updates, but for some reason they stopped, and so Luke and Leia are going to find out what's happened. When they get to Jabba's palace, they find hardly anyone's there. Someone lets them know, probably after Luke does a mind trick, that they're executing the prisoners and everyone's at the Sarlacc pit. And so we go to the Sarlacc pit, and Han and Chewie and Lando are all going to be executed because they attempted to rescue Han. Lando managed to release Han from the carbonite, but then they were planning an escape, and so they're being executed now. And then moments before the execution is to be carried out, Luke and Leia arrive and begin their aerial assault. And then Leia pilots the getaway vehicle while dropping Luke onto Jabba's barge. And then Lando, Han, and Chewie continue fighting their way out while they're still bound, and ultimately Leia is able to pick out everyone up just before the ships explode. Then on their way back to the Millennium Falcon, Luke reveals to them that Darth Vader is his father, and that he's going to return to Yoda now that they found Han so he can complete his training and continue the mission to defeat Darth Vader. So then Luke returns to Yoda, except that when he gets there, he can't find Yoda. So it's kind of a similar moment to the Jabba the Hutt scene earlier. Just as he's getting ready to leave, the Force ghosts of both Yoda and Obi-Wan appear. Yoda has died after Luke left, but they still have the conversation with him, and they confirm his heritage and that Leia is his sister. And Luke is really upset by this. He presses them on why they concealed this information, and they say that Luke wasn't ready to know. And rather than resolving this conflict and having Luke basically be like, oh, well, that's okay, Luke is really hurt here, and we get the sense through musical cues and the way that this is framed that Luke could be heading to the dark side. So then Leia and everybody else rejoins the rebellion, and they've learned about the mining operation to obtain the Kyber crystals to create another Death Star. They know they can't win a full-scale assault, but they think they can sneak a group to the surface of the planet and disarm the shield generator, which will allow the fleet to take out the main mining refinery ship where the crystals they've gotten so far are being stored, which is also the place the Emperor is planning to visit. So then Luke rejoins them at this point, and the heroes split into two groups. We have the surface group, which is going to be Leia, Han, C-3PO, and then the air group, which will be Luke, Lando, Chewie, and R2-D2. As they're getting ready to leave, Luke reveals the truth of the relationship to Leia, and that he's angry at the deception and looking forward to killing the Emperor, in another hint of a pull to the dark side. Leia tells him that she's glad that she knows that Luke is her brother, reframing Luke's anger and pulling him back to the light. It turns out that the operation was an Imperial Trap. The intelligence was good, but the Empire learned their plan, so the rebels didn't know the entire fleet of Star Destroyers would be there, or that Vader would be there as well. Vader and the Emperor are both in the refinery ship, as we find out when Luke and his X-Wing gets too close. The surface group encounters the Ewoks, who initially worship C-3PO. Of course, gotta look out for my boy C-3PO. And it's the same kind of situation. They plan to kill Leia and Han because they think they're the Imperials that have been destroying the planet, but C-3PO manages to translate for them that they're actually trying to fight the Imperials, and so the Ewok leadership offers an alliance. The Ewoks are the ones that go into the shield generator with the rebels, causing a distraction and allow the rebels to destroy it, but they're captured pretty much immediately after the shield generator has been taken out. The Millennium Falcon's being piloted by Lando and Chewie, and it's heavily damaged during the space battle with the Imperial Star Destroyers, which are actually fighting this time and not just sitting around. And so they're forced to retreat to go and make repairs, and they're going to regroup with the rebels later on a last strike strategy. But Luke realizes that the only way to end this is for him to confront Darth Vader and face his destiny. So he heads to the mining ship alone on his X-Wing, and the Imperials pretty much just let him pass. And the Emperor tells Luke that he caught and killed his friends to convince Luke to fight. The last we saw of the other rebels, it was true they were captured. So as far as the audience knows, it's true that they're dead now. And so Luke does give in to his anger, and the anger over the fact that Obi-Wan and Yoda lied to him about his heritage, and he's fighting, and it all kind of happens the same way where he's about to win. Vader says something to him like, you might as well join the dark side since the rebel cause died with his so-called friends. And then Luke realizes that killing Vader and the Emperor out of anger won't bring his friends back, but that the cause didn't die with them. And then the rest of it just kind of plays out the same way. Ultimately, Vader sacrifices himself to bring down the Emperor, but now that the leadership is dead, the Empire is forced into chaos. Some of the people are still trying to defend this mining rig, and Luke has to fight his way out. And during this, Luke senses Leia. Han and Leia and C-3PO made a plan to escape their captors, and it actually works, and they do get out, but then everyone finds out that Vader and the Emperor are dead, and so all the people who are guarding them just kind of run away, and it all becomes chaos. And Leia and Luke can sense each other, so they reunite and fight their way out together. And they're about to take one of the last Imperial shuttles off the mining rig, but it's destroyed as the Rebel forces start winning in space. But then Lando shows up in the Millennium Falcon and saves them, and then the space battle is won. They go back to the moon and they celebrate with the Ewoks, except the music is better. So that was my script doctor, and this was the last of my original trilogy reviews. I still love the original trilogy the best, despite the weakness of some parts of this film. And while I don't love the prequel or sequel trilogies nearly as much, I do think they make excellent memes or dank maymays, and they can be pretty fun in places. I'll probably stick with this format for my next few reviews, where I'll talk about the things that I liked, if I can find any, first, and then the things I didn't like, and then I'll do a little script doctoring on what I think would have worked better. Let me know in the comments if you liked my script doctoring of The Return of the Jedi, or if all of my ideas were bad and I should feel bad.
Your music's bad and you should feel bad.
See you next week for episode 1.